Help us reach 1,000 subscribers. I have never liked winter. Something about the white landscape and absolute silence always bothered me. But last year, I decided to face my discomfort and spend a week in a remote cabin We arrived at the cabin in the early afternoon. The place was picturesque, a small wooden structure surrounded by snow-covered pine trees. It was almost an hour away from the nearest town, and the road leading there was practically a tunnel of ice. The cabin was cozy, with a fireplace and windows offering an incredible view of the mountains. We were alone there, with no cell signal or neighbors for miles. It felt like the perfect place to escape the chaos of the city. On the first day, everything was calm. We wandered through the forest, took photos, and even built a snowman. The silence was deafening, but Emily seemed enchanted. "It's like being in another world," she said. However, that night, something changed. The snow began to fall more heavily, quickly covering the path we used to arrive. The wind howled against the windows, and the fireplace barely warmed the room. While Emily prepared something for us to eat, she heard a sound that didn't fit the environment. It was a faint crack, like footsteps in the snow. "Did you hear that?" she asked, moving to the window. "Hear what?" she replied, distracted. I looked outside, but all I saw was darkness. Maybe it was just the wind moving the branches, I thought, trying to convince myself. Later, while we were playing cards by the fireplace, the sound returned. This time, it was clearer, slow footsteps coming from the direction of the forest. "Maybe it's an animal," Emily suggested, but her expression revealed that she was also uncomfortable. We decided to ignore the sound and lock ourselves in the cabin for the night. We went to sleep in separate rooms, but the silence didn't last long. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a loud noise. Something had hit my bedroom window. I got up hesitantly and opened the curtain. What I saw made my heart stop. In the snow, there were footprints, not from an animal, but from someone barefoot. I ran to Emily's room and woke her up. "There's someone outside," I whispered, trying not to sound terrified. She followed me to the window, but the footprints were gone, covered by the snow that continued to fall. "Maybe you imagined it," she said, trying to reassure me. But before I could respond, we heard a sound coming from the door, knocking, steady and rhythmic. Emily and I froze, unable to move. A continuous knock, getting louder. I grabbed a metal poker from the fireplace, my heart pounding like a drum. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. There was no answer. I went to the door, trying to gather courage, but before I could open it, the knocking stopped abruptly. Silence returned, but now it felt even more oppressive. We decided to check through the living room window. When we pulled back the curtains, we saw something that took our breath away. Someone was standing near the trees, almost hidden by the darkness. I couldn't see their face, but it was definitely a person. They were barefoot, wearing torn clothing, and their body was bent in a way that seemed impossible. Emily squeezed my hand tightly. "This can't be real," she murmured. We ran to the bedroom and pushed a wardrobe against the door, trying to feel a bit safer. We sat in silence, listening to every sound. For hours, it seemed like nothing else would happen, until around 5 a.m. when we heard a scream coming from the forest. It was long, guttural, and human. When the sun finally began to rise, we left the cabin to investigate. There were no footprints in the snow, nor any sign that anyone had been there. We tried to forget what happened, but weeks later, Emily called me. "You need to see this," she said, sending a photo she had taken during our trip. It was one of the photos we took near the forest. In the background, between the trees, there was a figure, standing there, watching us. I never went back to that place, and to this day, on winter nights, I have nightmares about that figure. Some places are better left alone. Report 2. Last winter, I decided to take a trip that was supposed to be peaceful. I needed some time away from the city and chose to spend a week in a remote cabin in the mountains. It wasn't my first time in a secluded place, but this time everything felt more lonely. The plan was simple: relax, hike, and enjoy the silence of nature. What I didn't expect was for the snow to bring something more than just cold. I arrived at the cabin in the early afternoon. It was a simple building, surrounded by tall pine trees and with a magnificent view of the valley. The road leading there was covered in ice, but I managed to arrive before it got dark. The interior was rustic, with a fireplace and weathered wooden furniture. I left my backpack on the sofa and started to organize the place. I had enough food for a week and some books to pass the time. The first few hours were calm. The snow fell slowly, and the sound of the wind against the trees was almost relaxing. However, as night approached, the isolation began to weigh on me. Around 9 p.m., while I was near the fireplace, I heard a sound from outside. It was faint but distinct, like footsteps in the snow. I got up, went to the window, and looked outside. There was nothing, just darkness and the snow continuing to fall. I decided to ignore it and return to the fireplace, but the sound returned. This time it sounded closer. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the door. I opened it carefully, expecting to see an animal or something harmless. Everything was calm. However, when the flashlight beam hit the ground, I saw footprints. They were large and fresh, leading from the forest to the side of the cabin. My heart raced. I quickly closed the door, locking it. I tried to convince myself that it was just someone passing by, but who would be walking in the snow so late at night? Time passed slowly. The sound of footsteps stopped, but the feeling of being watched did not leave me. I decided to lock myself in the bedroom, taking a knife I found in the kitchen with me. Around 3 a.m., I was awakened by a loud noise. Something had knocked on the bedroom window. I got up slowly, gripping the knife tightly. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. Outside, in the middle of the snow, there was someone standing. I couldn't see the face, but their silhouette was clearly human. The figure didn't move, just facing the window. I stepped back, trying to control my panic. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. When I looked back at the window, the figure had disappeared. Silence returned, but it now felt even more oppressive. It was then that I heard another sound. This time, it was coming from inside the house. Footsteps, slow and heavy, echoing across the wooden floor. I locked the bedroom door and pushed a dresser against it. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. The footsteps approached, stopped outside the door, and for a moment everything was quiet. Then a knock, not loud, but enough to paralyze me. "Who is there?" My voice came out more aggressive than I expected. There was no answer. Just more knocks, followed by the sound of something scratching against the wooden door. I sat in the corner of the room until dawn, holding the knife. When I finally gathered the courage to leave, the house was empty. But the footprints were there. Not just outside, but also on the floor of the cabin, as if someone had circled the rooms during the night. I returned to the city that same day and never went back to that place. To this day, I don't understand what happened. I don't know if it was someone lost or something more. What I know is that the silence of the snow never felt so reassuring again. Report 3. It all happened last winter when I and 2 friends, Lucas and Marina, rented a cabin in a remote area for a weekend. The idea was simple: to spend a few days away from the hustle of the city with no internet or distractions, just the 3 of us and the snow around us. It seemed perfect. The scenery was beautiful, the cabin was cozy, and the silence of the mountains was almost therapeutic. However, what started as a tranquil experience ended in a way we could never forget. We arrived at the cabin in the early afternoon, with the sun still shining on the snow-covered mountains. The place was miles away from the main road, and the path leading there was practically invisible under the snow. The feeling of isolation was both exciting and unsettling. The interior of the cabin was simple, with a main room, a small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. The fireplace was lit, and the warmth made the atmosphere more inviting. We spent the day exploring the surroundings, playing cards, and laughing. When night fell, the temperature dropped and darkness took over. We decided to gather in the living room to tell stories, with the lights off and only the glow of the fireplace illuminating the space. It was then that the feeling of tranquility began to fade away. As Lucas was telling a horror story, we heard something outside. It was a muffled sound like footsteps in the snow. At first, we thought it was an animal, but the steps were heavy and rhythmic, as if someone was walking around the cabin. Marina suggested it might be the wind moving the branches of the trees, but Lucas and I knew that was not it. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the window. The light illuminated the snow outside, but there was nothing except for footprints. "Who would be walking around here at this hour?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "Maybe someone lost," Marina suggested, but her voice betrayed her nervousness. We decided to lock all the doors and windows, just as a precaution. However, the feeling that something was wrong lingered. Around midnight, while we tried to distract ourselves by playing cards, the lights flickered and went out. We fell silent, only hearing the sound of the wind outside. It was then that we heard it, a slow knock on the front door. Lucas declared himself, grabbed a poker from the fireplace, and gestured for us to be quiet. Marina held my hand tightly while I tried to peek out the window without being seen. "Who's there?" Lucas called out, but there was no answer. The knocking stopped, but soon after, we heard something scratching at the door. It was a sharp sound that made my stomach churn. Marina started to cry softly, and I felt my heart race. "It's not an animal," I whispered, more to myself than to them. Lucas decided to open a door. He insisted that if someone needed help, we couldn't ignore it. Against all my protests, he unlocked and opened it a crack. Outside, there was no one, just the footprints in the snow, leading from the forest to the door and disappearing. We quickly closed the door and pushed a bookshelf against it. The tension was palpable, and no one could think of a logical explanation for what was happening. We decided to stay awake together in the living room with the fireplace lit. But around 3 a.m., another sound paralyzed us. It came from the ceiling. Footsteps. Someone was walking slowly above us. "How did someone get up there?" Marina whispered, her voice filled with dread. Lucas grabbed a flashlight and started to climb the stairs to the attic, but I held him back. "Don't go. If there's someone up there, they don't want to be found." The footsteps stopped, but something fell to the ground, rolling. Lucas ran back, and we locked the door that led to the attic. We waited until dawn before leaving the cabin. When we finally had the courage to open the front door, we saw something that made us freeze. In the snow around the cabin, there were human footprints, but not just one trail. There were many, all leading to the cabin, but not returning to the forest. I never found out who or what was watching us that night. We returned to the city and swore never to speak of what happened. To this day, on quiet winter nights, I remember those footsteps in the ceiling and the feeling of being watched. Some experiences stay with you forever.